Now, recent elections in Europe have shown a resurgence of the right. The trend manifested most notably in the French legislative elections. And as Sweden locks the fate of its legislators, the resurgence of the right wing is back on the table. Now, the Swedes are voting today for their legislative elections. So let's take a look at the contenders in this electoral battle, which is being called as one of the most important in Sweden's living memory. So let's start with the incumbent. Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson. The Social Democrats are seeking a third term under her leadership. Now, the leader of the opposition is Ulf Kristersson, who wants his right-wing moderate party back in power. And then there is Jimmy Åkesson, the leader of the far-right Sweden Democrats, who also interestingly is in the race as a possible kingmaker. Now, the polls are predicting the Sweden Democrats could, of course, be crucial kingmakers this time round because of the divisive issues that they have raised in the part of their campaigning. Now, here's something about Swedish elections. Swedish political parties rarely obtain a majority in the parliament. This means that they must typically build alliances to form a stable government. Now, polls indicate that a centre-left bloc led by the Sweden Democrats has got only a wafer-thin lead against the potential bloc of the right-wing parties. Now, there are pretty high chances that the right-wing moderates would be joined by the far-right Sweden Democrats to form the government. Now, coming to the issues that have dominated the election campaigning so far, and the most important issue that has dominated the talk in Sweden is that of gang violence. The leading contenders have focused on gang violence in their campaign. This is in response to the rise of the shooting incidents that have been reported in Sweden this year. According to reports, at least about 48 people have been killed by firearms in Sweden this year. The Social Democrat government has recently introduced some harsher prison sentences. An increase in police resourcing has also been brought in. But the opposition parties say that not enough has been done to rein in the gun violence that has been witnessed in Sweden. Now, the moderates led by Kristersson have partly blamed what they call as too much immigration and too little integration for this issue. Now, the Sweden Democrats have also taken a very hard line against immigration. It's, of course, their pet project, on back of which they intend to become one of the key kingmakers in these elections. Now, coming to the next big issue that has dominated the campaigning so far this season, and this has got to do with the rise in energy prices. Experts have warned that Europe's energy crisis is now at a tipping point. Prices have gone through the roof. The Russian chokehold on supplies has been tightening by the day. Now, Swedish Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson has promised to provide $23 billion in terms of liquidity guarantees to electricity companies. And this comes amidst a spiraling cost of living crisis that has seen the cost of essential supplies like that of food go up by at least 25% in the span of the last few weeks. Meanwhile, the leader of the opposition, Ulf Kristersson of the Moderate Party, has proposed using more nuclear power in response to the soaring electricity bills. Kristersson has argued that Sweden should not shut down these power plants. It would have been self-serving in terms of energy production. Hence, the country, of course, won't have to import any electricity from abroad, and consequently, the prices would not have soared so much due to the war, is the argument that's been put forth. The Sweden Democrats have also criticised the country's decision to close nuclear plants. They've also called it one of the biggest political mistakes of modern times in the country. And now to give us more perspective in terms of how the Swedish people will, of course, vote and what is, of course, to be expected in this election and also the results that it is likely to throw up, we're being joined by Mr. David Isaksson, who's joining us from Stockholm. Isaksson is the editor-in-chief of the Global Bar magazine. Now, Mr. Isaksson, thank you very much indeed for joining us on this broadcast on WION. You know, the question that I want to ask you is, this election is being watched very, very closely, not just in Sweden, but indeed around the world. And one of the key issues that is being looked at is, of course, the rise of the far right. Within Sweden, help us understand as to how much of a concern is the rise of the far right in this election this time round.
Thank you so much for inviting me to the program. Actually, that is the question that everyone's asking me. I was just spending time with a lot of journalists from Latin America visiting Sweden. They all ask me the same question. And we don't really have reply. Now, as you said, have seen the rise of the far right all over Europe. But what people are asking themselves when they come from outside is, how come that in Sweden you are such a liberal country, you are such an equal country, you are known for being in solidarity? How come that the extreme right is rising so much in Sweden? And frankly, there's no really answer for that. I would say that they are being very skillful. They are gradually developing their base. They are immune to scandals. Every election, every second week, more or less, they pop up candidates from them that are having Nazi background, which just the other week, that was one of their candidates was shown that he wanted to kill black people. Actually, it doesn't matter for the audience. It seems that they are immune to any kind of scandal, as it looks like right now.
Right, and also what are the challenges of the incumbent, Magdalena Andersson? She's been in power for about 8 years. Is anti-incumbency an issue for her? How popular is she amongst the Swedish people?
I would say she is quite popular because she was the Minister of Finance. She was considered recognized as a very good minister, and she took over from the old party leader. So she's belonged to a new generation of relatively young politicians. She could be seen a bit stubborn, a bit hard, maybe to some people, but I think that she carries a strong support from within her party. And probably we had something called the Magdalena effect, which was so that the party rises in figures. And as it looks like now, the Social Democrats will gain a few percent, but on the expense of the other parties in the Green coalition and possibly the Liberal Party. So what it's looked like now, I just went out voting this morning. It's very calm, of course, but we will have long lines because we altered the procedures this year, so they take longer time to vote. And what they're saying that probably the counting will start later, so that means we will have a result probably quite late today. But it looks like Sweden has very high turnout, right. Over 80%, and I think it expects to be even higher this year, as it looks like right now. And of course, the question is always who will win from that, and that is hard to predict. Some would argue that if you could get more people from immigrant population that has the right to vote, that will benefit the Social Democrats and the left-wing party. Others will say if more people in the countryside, young men in the countryside vote, that will gain for the Swedish Democrats and the right. So we wait to see what happens in this.
I think 80% voter turnout is quite remarkable, no matter in which part of the world it is that voters come out to, in fact, vote. Now, the question that I want to ask you, Mr. Isaksson, is, what is the role in terms of the foreign policy choices that Magdalena Andersson has made? Because just before this election, a few months back, Sweden has said that it is leaving behind its neutrality and will be a part of the NATO military alliance. Try help us understand, for the Swedish people, for whom neutrality had been such a defining part of their foreign policy for so many decades, the fact that now they're likely to be a part of the NATO military alliance, how much of an effect is that likely to have on this election?
Yes, and I would agree with you. The fact that it's astonishingly no effect at all. National issues are not discussed in this election. NATO is a non-issue, as it was somehow sold into question marks before that. And it's very odd. I just wrote a column about that noting that even though we discussed, as you mentioned earlier, the energy prices, there's no connection with the war and in Ukraine in that. And so it's a really odd election in the sense that it's very, very local. And the fact that basically all parties, are in favor of NATO. The fact that the last party to join the support for the NATO was the right-wing party, the Swedish Democrats, which traditionally has a close relation to Russian Putin, as they have the other right-wing parties, the French National France, Front National, and the Italian. They have had this relation with Putin's Russia. But the Social Democratic Party, which was like traditionally totally against NATO, they switched sides. And if somebody had asked me in 15th of January, would Sweden become a member of NATO, I would have said it never happened during my lifetime. And now we're just waiting for Turkey to actually confirm. So it's been a total change in security policy. And as all major parties agree on this, it is a non-discussed question. But I think it's really a lack in this election, because even though we might be a member of NATO, we need to discuss the long-term effects of the security situation. This war might go on for another 10 years. We might have energy crisis. We will have more refugee crisis. And So that is really has an effect on the Swedish politics locally.
All right. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. David Isaksson, for joining us from Stockholm and getting us all those insights there.
Thank you so much for taking me on the program.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.